The Vanderwall house was a 2-story residence adjacent to what the sparse notes given to me indicated was mostly a cornfield. The building was approximately 1,000 square feet, which was particularly large for the area. Fairhaven was a minuscule town in northern Kentucky, though still considerably south of Cincinnati. I surmised within minutes of reading the dossier that it would be quite a long, disagreeable stagecoach ride there, all the way from the offices of Gunther and May in Nashville, where I was stationed. I was given the case by my employers on the 1st of the month. The estate had been sold in its entirety to our bank, and the owner, one Mr. Claude Vanderwall, had vacated the premises. The agent that acquired the property for us did so at an intriguingly low price, and said that Mr. Vanderwall would not wait for an inspection. He did, however, have the deed on his person at the time of the transaction. Thus my work began as an inspector. My particular speciality at Gunther May is inspecting properties that have nobody to speak for them. I pride myself on being thorough and meticulous, and so I most frequently will need to stay the night at or nearby those properties, depending on how safe I deem them to be. Stepping out of the coach, I alleviated myself of the irritable dispositions that my back and knees had taken on during the ride. The house was a dreary gray and had a loathsome, unwelcoming appearance, likely from a bachelor's lack of care to decoration. Its front porch lacking in chairs or chimes, yet there were no immediately apparent signs of external damage. I tipped the driver, thanked him, and sent him on his way. A soft wind blew through the untended cornfield, generating a long hiss. The road that led to the house wandered out of sight in the direction of town, from which no horses, whistles, or sounds of playing children could be heard, or else were completely drowned out by the sound of my coach abandoning me. Upon closer inspection, I found that the paint on the front door was peeling. Certainly this would not be the most welcoming sight to a potential buyer. I noted that the smell, too, was unwelcoming as I stepped inside. Mustiness paired with a perturbing sweetness like that of rotting fruit. These items would need to be noted, passed on, and remedied before any attempted sale. The first floor was in order in most respects. There was dust and cobwebs and other signs of neglect along such lines, but no mess to speak of, nothing out of place. I examined the baseboards and insides of cabinets for mouse holes or droppings, but found neither, greatly improving my estimated value of the property. Particularly, the prior owner had abandoned all manner of appliances, pots, pans, brooms, washcloths. As we had no way of contacting him, we would need to assume that he left these goods as part of the house. Though documentation of each of these appliances would be necessary, I knew they would prove themselves convenient, as I most definitely would be staying the night and could make use of them. No signs of damage or decay to the stairs. I opened the first room upstairs to find it completely empty, a stark contrast to what had been left below. The room's only features were 3 pale objects resting atop the windowsill. As I closed the gap between myself and the window, their shapes became more familiar to me. They were 3 animal skulls, grinning over the visage of the countryside. I am not well versed in identifying such things, but the one that was most easily recognizable was the skull of a horse. Rotating it in my grasp, I witnessed what appeared to be teeth growing out of the skull at odd ends and angles. The hairs on my arms stood on end. All 3 of the skulls possessed such strange teeth, in addition to the ones sitting in their jaws. Deeply unsettled, I left the skulls as they were and shut the door behind me as I left the room. I was now prepared for the worst, but the second upstairs room was fixed with a bed, bookshelves, a bedside, and a dresser. The bed was made and the shelf was adorned with books, the vast majority of which were medical in nature, specifically veterinary textbooks. This put a few of my agitated thoughts to rest. Having the skulls of beasts in one's home is perhaps peculiar for a veterinarian, but would be far more so for anyone else. Perhaps Mr. Vanderwall had been researching whatever strange malady had befallen them. The bed would be one more item that I would not need to concern myself over. I had slept with my bag as my pillow and my coat as my blanket before in houses that were completely barren, a sacrifice of traveling extensively light, but such occasions were rare and I frankly preferred them that way. My inspection of the house took quite some time, but I found no suspicious signs of damage or other seriously detrimental features that could devalue the property. Due to my lengthy journey, the hours of work took me into the night. The journey and subsequent inspection proved excruciatingly taxing. I warmed some of the canned rations I had with the conveniences downstairs and absconded to bed. However, I was awoken in the midst of my slumber. At first, in my balmy stupor, I could not discern the cause of my disturbance, but as it continued, I realized that I was listening to animal noises. Sounds such as the occasional neighs, grunts, bleats, and the heavy steps of hooves all emanated from the adjacent room. Intermittently, I also heard a sound like the rapid clicking of jaws. Just as I became decidedly alert, the noises ceased. I arose, quite befuddled, and considered the feasibility of it being a trick of acoustics. Given that there had been no standing barns or stables to speak of nearby, that possibility was quite minimal. I lit a candle from the bedside drawer and cautiously left the bedroom and approached the door of what I thought had been an empty room. As I opened the door, I held out the candle into the air beyond. It revealed nothing but the walls to me, shaking the shadow of the door with its flicker. I was relieved, for I looked down and saw that the skulls were now scattered about the floor in front of me. After returning to the bedroom with haste, I left the candle to burn and melt away at the bedside as I held my gaze out into the darkness of the room. I dearly longed for my bed in my apartment, where my greatest concerns at night were rarely more than distant conversations or the occasional rumble or hiss of plumbing. I briefly considered the option of fleeing the premises, running as expediently as I could in my nightshirt and slippers down the rocky path and into town. However, that would have been a dark path with many turns, and should something have been pursuing me, I decided against it. In fact, I began to doubt my reason and my senses. My fatigue was so great that after some time, my breathing slowed and my eyes dropped. I contemplated the possibility that my exhaustion was making me delirious, and that my dreams were intermixing with my waking state. I felt my chest become heavy and my eyes glaze over. As I was on the verge of sleep, a peculiarity struck me. It nearly seemed like some of the heavy breaths I was hearing were not my own, as though just maybe something was slowly, deeply sniffing at the bottom of the door. Again I heard several simultaneously and quickly clacking jaws in an insect-like chorus that rose to a crescendo and then died down, followed by a loud thump at the door. I was now quite fully awake, and I was certain that the thump, at the very least, had been no dream. I snatched up the candle and held it up above my lap as I sat up and brought my knees to my chest. I stared wide-eyed towards the door, and when I began to feel drowsy, I held my left hand over the flame until I was not. When there was not left of the candle but a tiny flame in the pool of wax that dripped from the taper holder onto the sheets, I fished another candle out of the bedside and lit that one too. The morning sunlight gave me the courage to leave the room. As with it came the promise of my stagecoach's return. When I grabbed the door handle, I braced myself, expecting to see the skulls laying at my feet, but when I opened the door, there was nothing there. I peered into the other room, which I had left open in my panic last night, and saw that the skulls were neither on the floor nor in the windowsill. Turning in place, I found that the door to the bedroom now had a horse hoof-size indentation 2 feet up. I waited on the front porch for the coach, bag in hand. A light mist coated the landscape, not yet fully shewed by the sun. When the wagon pulled up, I stepped carefully through the mist, surveying my path as best I could. As I write this, it is the 2nd of the month. Let this journal entry serve to none but myself as a correction to the grievous addendum that I will soon be writing in my report, which will say that I found a dreadful rodent infestation in the house, and that I recommend that all items found within it be disposed of, or better yet, for the entire house to be burned to the ground. I dearly wish that I could write the entire truth of the matter, or at least that my waterman would abstain from making such massive blots on the page from this bumpy ride. On top of all this, I may have caught a cold, though my driver insists he is perfectly warm. I can't seem to stop my teeth from chattering.